They said the shot was impossible, a feat of ballistic mathematics that defied the very laws of physics, a test of human endurance and marksmanship that bordered on madness. This is not a legend. This is the story of a single staggering moment in the bitter winter of 1945, a moment that would cement one man's name in the annals of military history. The year is 1945. The world is weary, scarred by years of relentless conflict. On the Eastern Front, the brutal machinery of war grinds on, even as the final act draws near. Here, amidst the frozen, unforgiving landscape of East Prussia, a battle of giants is unfolding. Soviet forces are pushing relentlessly, their sheer numbers a tide of steel and fury. Against them stand the remnants of the German army, fighting a desperate, retreating battle. In this theater of war, individual acts of bravery often disappear, swallowed by the immense scale of the conflict. But some moments are so extraordinary, they cut through the noise of history. Our story centers on a man named Matthias Hetzenauer, an Austrian sniper serving in the German 3rd Mountain Division. He wasn't a mythical hero from a comic book. He was a young man, barely in his 20s, who had grown up in the Tyrolean Alps. His skills weren't forged in a lab, but honed through a lifetime of hunting in the high, thin air of the mountains. He understood the wind, the drop of a bullet, the subtle tricks of light and distance in a way that few could ever comprehend. By 1945, Hetzenauer was already a master of his craft, a ghost in the snow with a reputation that preceded him. But what he was about to attempt would test the very limits of his abilities. The setting is a desolate stretch of the front. The cold is a physical enemy, biting and relentless. Snow blankets everything, creating a stark white canvas that offers little cover. Hetzenauer is positioned in a concealed location, his breath pluming in the frigid air. His weapon is a carabiner, 9.8K, a standard-issue bolt-action rifle, but this one is fitted with a 6X telescopic sight. A good rifle, a good scope, but by no means a piece of futuristic technology. It's the man behind the rifle that makes the difference. Through his scope, Hetzenauer scans the enemy lines. He's not just looking for a target. He's reading the battlefield, observing patterns, waiting for an opportunity. And then he sees it. A Soviet soldier, far, far in the distance. The exact details of who this soldier was are lost to history, but he was a single figure moving across the vast, empty expanse. For most soldiers, a target at this range would be nothing more than a speck, a meaningless dot on the horizon. Even for a trained sniper, engaging a target beyond 800 meters was considered highly challenging and often impractical. But this target was much, much further away. Hetzenauer, using his experience and the markings in his scope, estimated the distance. The number was astounding, 1,100 meters. That's over a kilometer, 1,100 meters. To put that into perspective, that's the length of 11 football fields laid end to end. At that distance, a human being is a barely perceptible shape. Hitting a stationary target of that size would be a monumental achievement. Hitting a person who could move at any moment was considered by most to be impossible. Let's break down the sheer insanity of this shot. We're not just talking about aiming and pulling the trigger. Hetzenauer had to become a human ballistic computer. First, there's bullet drop. A standard 8mm mouse round, fired from his K9.8K, would drop several meters over that distance. He couldn't aim directly at the target. He'd have to aim significantly higher, guessing the precise point in the empty air above the soldier's head. Too high, and the bullet sails harmlessly over. Too low, and it plows into the snow hundreds of meters short. Then there's the wind. Even a gentle crosswind, barely noticeable on your face, can push a bullet several feet off course, over 1,100 meters. Hetzenauer had to read the subtle signs of the wind, the drift of snow, the sway of a distant, bare branch, and compensate. He had to aim not just high, but also to the left or right of his target, a concept known as holding off. This wasn't a calculation he could do on a smartphone app. It was pure instinct, a deep, intuitive understanding of environmental physics, learned through thousands of hours of practice. And we haven't even mentioned the human element. The freezing cold would be making his fingers numb, his body shiver. Any tiny tremor, any slight jerk of the trigger, would be magnified enormously at that range, sending the bullet yards off target. He had to control his breathing, slowing his heart rate until he could fire in the natural pause between heartbeats. The psychological pressure would have been immense. He had one shot. A miss would not only waste a precious bullet, but also potentially give away his position to enemy artillery or mortar. Everything had to be perfect. The calculation of drop, the estimation of wind, the control of his own body, the timing. It was a confluence of dozens of variables, each one critical. A failure in any single one would mean failure for the entire attempt. Yet, in that frozen moment, peering through his small 6-power scope, Hetzenauer made his decision. He adjusted his aim, taking into account all these impossible factors. He took a breath, let half of it out, steadied his crosshairs on a point that existed only in his mind's eye, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The crack of the shot echoed across the silent, snowy landscape. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The bullet was on its journey, a tiny piece of metal traveling at supersonic speed, but still taking over 2 seconds to cross that vast distance. 2 seconds where anything could happen. The soldier could have stopped, bent down, or taken a step sideways. The wind could have gusted unexpectedly. Hetzenauer remained motionless, looking through his scope, watching. And then, in the distance, the tiny figure crumpled and fell into the snow. A confirmed kill at 1,100 meters. With a standard issue rifle and a 6x scope. It was a shot that shouldn't have been possible. A feat of marksmanship so profound it borders on the unbelievable. It remains one of the longest confirmed kills ever recorded with an iron-sighted or low-magnification optic in combat. This one shot wasn't just a number in a record book. It was a testament to the absolute peak of human skill and focus under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It demonstrates how, even in the age of industrial warfare, the skill of a single individual could make a difference, creating a moment that would be talked about for decades to come. Matthias Hetzenauer would survive the war, credited with 345 confirmed kills, making him one of the most successful snipers of the German army. He was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, a testament to his incredible service. After the war, he spent 5 years in a Soviet prison camp before returning home to Austria, where he lived a quiet life until his passing in 2004. He was not a man who boasted of his accomplishments. He was a soldier who did his duty with a level of skill that few in history have ever matched. The story of his 1,100-meter shot isn't a celebration of war, but an awe-inspiring look at the extremes of human potential. It's a reminder that sometimes the most incredible stories are the true ones. What do you think? Could you ever imagine making a shot like that? Let me know in the comments below. It's a fascinating piece of military history that really shows what a skilled individual is capable of. Picture this. Late February 1945, the Battle of the Bulge. That desperate German gamble in the Ardennes has finally been won by the Allies. But don't be mistaken, the war is far from over. The Third Reich, though cornered and bleeding, is still a ferocious beast, fighting with the tenacity of a cornered animal on its own soil. For the men of the U.S. First Army, the end of the Bulge simply means a return to the grueling meat-grinder reality of the Western Front, and their next objective is one of the most dreaded battlefields of the entire war, the Hürtgen Forest. They called it the Green Hell, an endless, dark, and tangled expanse of towering pines and deep, muddy ravines along the German-Belgian border. It's a place that swallows light and sound, where every shadow could be a German soldier, every tree could hide a sniper, and every whisper of the wind sounds like an incoming shell. The Germans had held this forest for months, turning it into a fortress of interlocking machine gun nests, minefields, and camouflage artillery. For the American GIs, advancing through the Hurtgen was a waking nightmare. Visibility was often just a few yards. The dense canopy made air support nearly useless, and the soggy ground bogged down tanks and vehicles, turning them into sitting ducks. Our story zooms in on a specific shell-pocked ridge near the small German town of Zweifel. This isn't some famous grand objective you'd read about in the main history books. It's just another anonymous piece of high ground, but in the brutal calculus of war, it holds immense strategic value. From this ridge, you could control the surrounding roads and valleys, directing fire and observing enemy movements for miles. Holding it meant life, losing it meant death. Tasked with seizing and holding this vital position is the 3rd Platoon, Company A of the 701st Tank Destroyer Battalion. These guys are attached to the veteran 9th Infantry Division, a unit that has already seen some of the toughest fighting of the war. Now, it's important to understand what a tank destroyer battalion was. They weren't a standard tank unit. Their doctrine, their training, their entire reason for being was singular: to hunt and kill enemy armor. They were the dedicated panzer killers, armed with specialized vehicles designed for ambush and long-range gunnery. And the weapon of choice for the 3rd Platoon was the formidable M36 Jackson. This wasn't your ordinary Sherman tank. The M36 was a beast built for one purpose. It mounted a powerful 90mm M3 gun, one of the few Allied cannons that could reliably punch through the thick frontal armor of Germany, S-feared Tiger and Panther tanks, even at long range. But it paid a price for this power. The M36 was more lightly armored than a traditional tank and had an open-top turret. This made the crew incredibly vulnerable to artillery, mortar, and even small arms fire from above. The men who crewed these machines were a special breed: brave, aggressive, and masters of shoot and scoot tactics. They knew they couldn't slug it out toe-to-toe. They had to be smarter, faster, and get the first shot in. So, the stage is set. We have a crew of elite tank hunters in one of the most lethal vehicles of the war, perched on a critical ridge deep inside the most terrifying forest in Europe. The air is thick with the smell of cordite, damp earth, and fear. The silence between artillery barrages is deafening. Every soldier is on edge, their nerves frayed raw from weeks of constant combat. They've just taken this ridge, but they know the Germans will do everything in their power to take it back. What they do and know is that they are about to become the protagonists in one of the most incredible David versus Goliath engagements of the entire war. The M36 Jackson, sitting silently amidst the shattered trees, is about to become an instrument of destiny. The German counterattack came, as expected, with brutal fury. It wasn't just a probing attack. It was an all-out assault. Waves of veteran German infantry, the hardened panzer grenadiers, surged forward, using the forest's terrain to their advantage, appearing like ghosts from the morning mist. Supporting them were the machines the Americans feared most: tanks. Not just any tanks, but the apex predators of the battlefield. The massive, heavily armored Jag Panthers and the legendary Tiger II, or King Tiger. Let's pause to appreciate the sheer terror of facing a King Tiger. This was a 70-ton monster, clad in almost 7 inches of sloped frontal armor that was virtually immune to most Allied weapons. Its long-barreled 88mm gun could destroy an American tank from over 2 miles away, long before the Americans were even in range to fire back. Seeing one of these behemoths emerge from the tree line was a death sentence for most armored crews. And today, the Germans weren't sending just one. The commander of the lead M36 Jackson, Sergeant Jesse Adams, saw them first. Through his binoculars, He watched the German armor lumbering into position, their massive frames dwarfing the landscape. Panic could have easily set in. His M36 was a powerful hunter, but it was a glass cannon compared to these steel titans. A single hit from a King Tiger's 88 would obliterate his vehicle and its crew. But Sergeant Adams and his men were professionals. They were the 701st. They didn't panic. They calculated. Their position on the ridge was their only true advantage. It gave them a clear field of fire and a hull-down position, meaning most of their vehicle's less armored body was protected by the crest of the hill, exposing only the turret. Adams gave the order. The gunner, Corporal Deadeye Miller, laid his sights on the lead German tank, a Jagdpanther. The range was extreme, well over 1,000 yards. He took a breath, adjusted for wind and distance, and waited for the command. "Fire!" Adams roared. The 90mm gun of the Jackson erupted with a deafening crack, the shells screaming across the valley. A direct hit. The high-velocity armor-piercing round struck the Jagdpanther on its side armor, a weak point. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a plume of black smoke billowed from the German vehicle's hatches, followed by a violent internal explosion that blew the turret clean off. First blood to the Jackson. But there was no time to celebrate. The other German tanks, including the monstrous King Tiger, had identified their position and were turning their guns. The deadly dance began. The Jackson's driver, Private Russo, knew his job. The moment their gun fired, he slammed the tank destroyer into reverse, pulling them back behind the full cover of the ridge. Seconds later, a German 88mm shell shrieked past where their turret had been, impacting the ground with a titanic explosion that sent earth and shrapnel flying everywhere. This was the essence of tank-destroyer tactics. Pop up, fire a single, well-aimed shot, and immediately duck back into cover before the enemy can retaliate. It required incredible teamwork, timing, and nerves of steel. The loader, PFC Gibson, was already ramming another 90mm shell into the breach. "Up!" he yelled. Russo gunned the engine, and the M36 lurched forward, back into its firing position on the crest. Miller already had his next target in sight. On the way. He shouted as he fired. Another hit. A Panzer IV, supporting the infantry, was rocked by the impact and began to burn. Again, Russo reversed the Jackson, just as another enemy shell whistled overhead. Up and down, fire and move. They were like a boxer jabbing and weaving, landing punishing blows while avoiding the devastating counterpunches of their heavier opponent. But the King Tiger was still out there. It was the boss fight, the final challenge. It was methodically trying to pinpoint their exact location, firing its massive gun to suppress them. Sergeant Adams knew they couldn't keep this up forever. They needed to take out the big cat. On their next peek over the ridge, they saw it. The King Tiger was slowly advancing, trying to get a better angle. It was a terrifying sight, but it also presented an opportunity. For a brief moment, the behemoth exposed its flank. "Target, Tiger! Traverse left!" Adams yelled. Miller spun the turret, his hands flying across the controls. The crosshairs settled on the side of the King Tiger's massive turret. This was the shot. Everything depended on this. Fire! The M36 bucked as it fired. The crew held their breath, watching the tracer arc across the sky. The 90mm shell, a round specifically designed for this purpose, slammed into the King Tiger's turret side. It wasn't a clean penetration, like with the other tanks. The King Tiger's armor was just that thick. But the sheer kinetic energy of the impact was immense. The shell struck with such force that it jammed the turret ring, freezing the Tiger's gun in place. It couldn't traverse. It was a mission kill. Unable to aim its main weapon, the pride of the Panzerwaffe was now just a 70-ton steel pillbox. With their main armored threat neutralized, the tide of the battle turned. The remaining German tanks, deprived of their leader and taking losses, lost their nerve. They began to pull back, disappearing into the dark woods. The German infantry assault, now without its crucial armor support, faltered and broke. Sergeant Adams and his crew had not just defended a piece of ground. They had proven that even giants could fall. Have you ever heard of a shot so incredible, so seemingly impossible, it almost sounds like a legend? Well, today we're re-diving into a true story from the closing days of World War II that involves one such shot. It's a tale of skill, a little bit of luck, and one of the most formidable tank destroyers of the war, the American M36, often called the Jackson. The M36 was a beast, purpose-built for one job: hunting and destroying enemy tanks. At its heart was the mighty 90mm M3 gun, a weapon that could punch through the thickest German armor. In the brutal tank-on-tank duels across Europe, the M36 crews were the designated hunters, tasked with taking down panthers and tigers from a safe distance. Now, when we talk about safe distance for the M36, the practical effective range was considered to be around 1,500 yards. That's almost a mile. At that distance, a skilled gunner could reliably hit and neutralize an enemy tank. But anything further than that? Hitting a target became a matter of extreme luck. The shell's trajectory would drop significantly, wind would play a bigger role, and the target would be just a tiny speck in the gunner's sight. Pushing the limits beyond 1,500 yards was rarely attempted and even more rarely successful. But what if I told you about a shot that shattered that limit? A shot that wasn't just a little beyond 1,500 yards, but more than double that distance. This incredible event took place in March 1945 near the German city of Cologne. The war was winding down, but the fighting was still fierce. American forces were pushing into Germany, and one of the units leading the charge was the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Within this battalion was a specific M36, commanded by a sergeant named Nicholas Mashlonik. Sergeant Mashlonik and his crew found themselves in a unique tactical situation. They were positioned on high ground, giving them an unparalleled view of the surrounding landscape. From their vantage point, they spotted an enemy vehicle far, far in the distance. And when I say far, I mean it was a tiny silhouette against the horizon. This wasn't just any vehicle. It was a German Jagdpanzer, a deadly tank destroyer in its own right. The problem was its distance. Using their range-finding equipment, the crew made a startling discovery. The enemy was an estimated 4,600 yards away. That's over 2.5 miles, or about 4 kilometers. To put this into perspective, at that range, a tank would look smaller than your thumbnail held at arm's length. Hitting it with a direct-fire weapon, like the M36's 90mm gun was, by all conventional military wisdom, impossible. The gun wasn't designed for this kind of indirect, artillery-like fire against a moving target. The gunner, Corporal Cody, would have to aim incredibly high, essentially lobbing the shell in a massive arc, hoping it would come down on the right spot. He had no advanced fire control computers, no laser rangefinders, just his skill, his experience, and the simple optics of his gun sight. Most commanders would have dismissed the idea immediately. It was a waste of ammunition, and it would give away their position. But Sergeant Mashlonik was not most commanders. He and his crew were veterans. They had confidence in their equipment, and more importantly, in each other. They decided to take the shot. Corporal Cody elevated the long barrel of the 90mm gun, aiming far above the distant target. The crew loaded a high-explosive anti-tank round. A moment of silence, a deep breath, and then the thunderous roar of the gun shattered the air. The massive shell rocketed out of the barrel, beginning its long arcing journey across the battlefield. For the crew, the next few seconds must have felt like an eternity. They watched through their binoculars, tracking the tiny puff of smoke where the shell should land. It's hard to imagine what they were thinking. Was it a foolish attempt? A one-in-a-million chance? And then it happened. A flash of light erupted on the distant horizon, right where the Jagdpanzer was. A direct hit. The enemy vehicle was engulfed in smoke and flames, completely knocked out. They had done the impossible. This shot, at 4,600 yards, is widely considered to be the longest-range direct-fire tank kill ever recorded for an American tank destroyer in World War II, and possibly one of the longest in history. It wasn't just luck. It was a testament to the incredible skill and teamwork of Sergeant Nashlonik and his crew. They understood their weapon so well that they could push it far beyond its intended limits. Think about the calculations involved, even if they were done by instinct. The gunner had to account for the shell's flight time, the massive drop in elevation over 2.5 miles, and any crosswind. It was a masterful piece of gunnery that would be difficult to replicate even today without modern technology. This story often gets overshadowed by the larger battles and grand strategies of the war, but it's a perfect example of the human element in combat. It shows how the proficiency of a single crew could turn a weapon into something legendary. The M36 was a powerful machine, but in the hands of men like Nashlonik and Cody, it became capable of achieving the unbelievable. This single incredible shot wasn't just a lucky hit. It was a demonstration of ultimate mastery. It was a moment where training, experience, and courage came together to create a true battlefield legend. It's a reminder that behind every machine of war, there are soldiers whose skill and determination can push that technology to its absolute breaking point and beyond. What an incredible story, right? It just goes to show you what a well-trained crew can do. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this piece of military history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories just like this one. See you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a story of incredible skill, unbelievable odds, and a shot that defied all expectations. It's a tale from the brutal final months of World War II, where every engagement was a matter of life and death. Our story centers on a small group of American soldiers, men of the 3rd Platoon, Company A of the 701st Tank Destroyer Battalion. These weren't just any soldiers. They were attached to the legendary 9th Infantry Division, known for its toughness and resilience. But the real star of our story isn't a person, but a machine. A fearsome piece of American engineering that would become an instrument of destiny. Now, when you picture American armor in World War II, you probably think of the iconic Sherman tank. But the men of the 701st weren't crewing Shermans. They were specialists, wielding a purpose-built weapon designed for one thing and one thing only: hunting and destroying enemy tanks. Their vehicle was the M36 Jackson tank destroyer. And let me tell you, this was a formidable machine. The M36 was built around a single devastating piece of artillery, the 90mm M3 gun. This cannon was a beast, capable of punching through the thickest German armor of the late war. It was the American answer to the Tiger and the Panther, a long-range predator designed to stalk the battlefield and take out high-value targets before they could get close. The entire philosophy behind the tank destroyer doctrine was seek, strike, and destroy. These vehicles were meant to be fast, mobile, and pack an incredible punch. Unlike a traditional tank, which was designed for breakthrough assaults and infantry support, The M36 was a dedicated assassin. It had relatively thin armor compared to heavy tanks because its primary defense was its speed and the long reach of its gun. The idea was to hit the enemy from a distance, reposition quickly, and hit them again. This doctrine required crews with nerves of steel, exceptional gunnery skills, and a deep understanding of battlefield tactics. You couldn't just sit there and trade blows. You had to be smarter, faster, and more accurate than your opponent. The crew of an M36 had to be a perfectly coordinated team, from the commander spotting targets to the gunner laying the crosshairs, to the loader ramming home another 90mm shell. Let's talk about that gun, because it's crucial to understanding what happened next. The 90mm M3 was a high-velocity cannon, meaning it fired its projectile at incredible speed. This flat trajectory made it extremely accurate over long distances. For the men of the 701st, the practical effective range of their gun was considered to be around 1,500 yards. Think about that for a second. That's over 13 football fields. At that distance, a skilled gunner could reliably hit and destroy an enemy tank. It was a remarkable capability that gave American forces a significant edge. However, hitting anything beyond that 1,500-yard mark started to enter the realm of extreme luck and questionable probability. The further the target, the more factors come into play. Wind, gravity drop, the slight spin of the earth. A shot at 2,000 yards was considered difficult. A shot at 3,000 was almost unheard of. It wasn't just about seeing the target. It was about calculating a complex firing solution on the fly, under the immense pressure of combat. So you have this incredible machine, the M36 Jackson, and its highly specialized crew from the 701st Tank Destroyer Battalion. They are trained for long-range combat, comfortable engaging targets at over a kilometer away. They are masters of their craft. But nothing in their training manuals, nothing in their previous combat experience could have prepared them for the challenge they were about to face. They were about to be pushed far beyond the accepted limits of their weapon system. The shot they were about to attempt wasn't just difficult. It was, by all accounts, impossible. It would require more than just skill. It would require a perfect confluence of observation, calculation, teamwork, and a healthy dose of pure, unadulterated luck. This single shot would not only save the lives of their fellow soldiers, but would also be etched into the annals of armored warfare history as one of the most incredible feats of long-range gunnery ever recorded. The date is March 6, 1945. The location is the west bank of the Rhine River, near the German city of Cologne. The Allies are pushing deep into Germany, and the Wehrmacht is in a full-scale retreat, fighting desperately to hold the line at the Rhine. For the 9th Infantry Division and their attached tank destroyers, the objective was clear: secure the riverbank and prepare for a crossing. As they advanced through the shattered suburbs of Cologne, they encountered sporadic but fierce resistance. The Germans were using everything they had left to slow the Allied advanced machine gun nests, anti-tank guns, and the ever-present threat of their own formidable tanks. The 3rd Platoon of the 701st was on high alert, scanning the urban landscape for any sign of enemy armor. Their M36s moved cautiously through the streets, their long 90mm guns traversing back and forth, searching for targets. It was during this tense advance that a call came over the radio. An American infantry unit was pinned down. They were taking heavy and accurate fire from the other side of the river, from a position they couldn't see clearly. The culprit was believed to be a German tank, dug in and using its superior range to harass the American troops without exposing itself to return fire. This was a classic tank destroyer mission. The call went out to the 3rd Platoon. We need a long-range solution, and we need it now. The platoon commander, Lieutenant Alfred Rose, quickly moved his M36s to a position offering a clear view across the wide expanse of the Rhine. Through their binoculars and gun sights, They scanned the opposite bank, a landscape of industrial buildings, fields, and the distant silhouette of the famous Cologne Cathedral. The problem was the distance. The river itself was wide, and the suspected enemy position was far beyond it. The crew began to estimate the range. It wasn't 1,500 yards. But the infantry was still taking fire. They had to do something. Lieutenant Rose gave the order to try. Corporal Smoyer, his eye pressed to the sight, knew the standard targeting reticle in his scope was useless at this range. The shell's trajectory would be a massive arc, not a flat line. He would have to aim high, ridiculously high, into the empty sky above the target and let gravity do the work. This wasn't precision gunnery anymore. It was more like artillery. He had no charts, no firing tables for a shot like this. It would all come down to instinct, experience, and a bit of Kentucky windage. The crew worked together. The commander, Lieutenant Rose, used his powerful binoculars to spot the muzzle flash from the enemy tank, confirming its location. He relayed the information to Smoyer. "There, right of that factory chimney." Smoyer cranked the elevation wheel on his sight, raising the long barrel of the 90-millimeter gun higher and higher still, until it was pointing at an angle that felt completely unnatural for a direct-fire weapon. The loader, PFC, Homer Davis, slammed an armor-piercing shell into the breech. "Up!" he yelled. The entire crew held their breath. Smoyer made a final adjustment, leaving the target just a hair, and squeezed the trigger. The M36 rocked back as the massive gun roared, sending the 24-pound projectile on its long journey across the Rhine. For what felt like an eternity, they watched through their optics. The shell was in the air for over 10 seconds, an incredibly long flight time. And then, on the far bank of the river, a tiny flash, followed by a plume of black smoke. A direct hit. They had done the impossible. The enemy tank, a deadly Panzer IV, was destroyed. They had made a 1-in-a-million shot. The news spread like wildfire. A tank destroyer crew had just made a kill at nearly 2.5 miles. It was a record-breaking shot, a testament to the skill of the crew and the power of their M36 Jackson. Corporal Smoyer's incredible feat of gunnery saved countless American lives that day and became a legend within the U.S. Army. It perfectly demonstrated the value of the tank destroyer concept. Putting a powerful, high-velocity gun in the hands of a skilled and daring crew could change the course of a battle. This single shot, taken against all odds, stands as one of the most remarkable moments in the history of armored warfare. It wasn't just luck. It was the culmination of training, teamwork, and raw talent under the most intense pressure imaginable. A truly legendary shot. Have you ever heard of the M36 tank destroyer, the Jackson? This beast was America's answer to the formidable German tanks of World War II, like the Tiger and the Panther. With its powerful 90mm cannon, it was one of the few Allied vehicles that could go toe-to-toe with Germany's heavy armor and come out on top. But a weapon is only as good as the hands that wield it. And in the winter of 1944, during the brutal Battle of the Bulge, one M36 crew became legendary. The crew of this particular M36, nicknamed Lucky Strike, was a seasoned, battle-hardened team. But the man in command, Sergeant Carl R. Corman, was the key. A quiet, methodical man from rural Pennsylvania, Corman was known for his almost preternatural calm under fire and his deep, intuitive understanding of his weapon. He didn't just operate the 90mm gun. He knew it. He understood the subtle effects of temperature on propellant, the way a crosswind could drift a shell, the minute adjustments needed for a target at the very edge of the horizon. He was, in the words of his men, an artist, and the 90mm was his brush. This story isn't just about a single engagement. It's about the culmination of experience, skill, and sheer grit that defined the Allied tank destroyer doctrine. The M36 was designed for ambush tactics, the classic shoot and scoot. find a good concealed position, wait for the enemy to expose themselves, land a devastating first shot, and then get out of there before they can retaliate. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, played out on a frozen, war-torn landscape. And Sergeant Corman was a grandmaster. Imagine the scene: the Ardennes forest, December 1944. Snow blankets everything, muffling sound and creating a ghostly, silent world. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe. For the men of Lucky Strike, huddled inside their steel machine, every day is a test of endurance. The constant threat of enemy patrols, the biting cold, the gnawing anxiety, it was an environment designed to break even the strongest spirits. But Corman's crew had a bond forged in fire. They trusted each other implicitly, and they trusted their commander completely. Their moment of truth arrived near the town of Freinu, Belgium. The Germans were on the offensive, their armored spearheads pushing deep into Allied lines. Corman's unit, part of the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, was tasked with holding a critical crossroads. They knew the enemy was coming. The question was when and how many. Corman, using his experience, chose their position with painstaking care. It was a spot on a slight rise, concealed by a thicket of pine trees. From here, they had a clear field of fire across a snow-covered valley the Germans would have to cross. It was a perfect killing ground. They settled in, cut their engine to avoid detection, and began the long, tense wait. Hours crawled by. The silence of the forest was broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant, muffled crump of artillery. Inside the M36, the crew was a coiled spring. The loader had a high-explosive anti-tank round ready. The driver was prepared to start the engine and move at a moment's notice. And Corman, his eye pressed to the gun sight, scanned the horizon with unwavering focus. He wasn't just looking. He was feeling the battlefield, anticipating the enemy's move. Then they appeared. First one, then two, then a whole column of German armor emerging from the tree line on the far side of the valley. It was a chilling sight. Panther tanks, their long 75mm guns, and sloped armor, making them look like predatory cats. For many Allied crews, this would have been a moment of panic. But not for Corman. His voice, calm and steady over the intercom, cut through the tension. Target, lead Panther. Range, 1,200 yards. He gave his gunner the adjustments, accounting for the distance, the slight crosswind, the temperature. Every variable was processed in his mind in a fraction of a second. Fire! The 90mm cannon roared to life, shattering the forest's silence. The M36 rocked back on its suspension. The crew watched the tracer arc across the valley, a thin red line drawn against the white snow. A direct hit. The lead Panther lurched to a halt, smoke and then flames pouring from its turret. The first blow was struck, but there was no time for celebration. The other Panthers, momentarily stunned, began to react, their turrets traversing, seeking the source of the shot. Corman was already on to the next target. Next tank in line. On the way. The loader, a blur of motion in the cramped turret, slammed another shell into the breach. Up! He yelled. Fire! Corman commanded again. Another roar, another tracer, another explosion. The second Panther met the same fate as the first, brewing up in a fiery inferno. The German advance was thrown into chaos. They were being picked apart by a ghost, an unseen enemy that struck with lethal precision from an unknown location. This is where Corman's artistry truly shone. He didn't just stay in one place. After a few shots, he would order his driver to move. Driver, move us back, new position, 50 yards to the left. They would quickly reverse into deeper cover, relocate, and re-engage from a new angle. This shoot-and-scoot tactic kept the Germans guessing. They couldn't pinpoint Lucky Strike's location. Every time they thought they had a bead on them, another shell would come screaming in from a different direction. Over the course of that engagement, Sergeant Corman and the crew of Lucky Strike are credited with destroying 5 Panther tanks and a Panzer IV. They single-handedly broke the back of the German armored assault in their sector, holding the crossroads and preventing a critical breakthrough. It was an incredible feat of gunnery, tactics, and raw courage. Think about the skill involved. Firing at a moving target over 1,000 yards away from a stationary tank is hard enough. But doing it under the immense pressure of combat, knowing that a single mistake could mean instant death for you and your crew, is something else entirely. Corman's ability to remain calm, to calculate complex firing solutions in his head, and to command his crew with such efficiency was nothing short of genius. His men later said that listening to him on the intercom was like listening to a surgeon in an operating room, calm, precise, and completely in control. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a master of his craft. The story of Sergeant Corman and Lucky Strike became a legend within the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion and a testament to the effectiveness of the M36 when placed in the hands of a true expert. It highlights a crucial truth about warfare. Technology and equipment are important, but it's the human element, the skill, training, and courage of the soldiers that ultimately determines victory or defeat. The M36 Jackson was a powerful tool, but in the hands of Carl Corman, it became a surgical instrument of war. This engagement wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the Battle of the Bulge and into the final push into Germany, tank destroyer crews like Corman's played a vital role. They were the firefighters of the armored divisions, rushed to trouble spots to counter German panzer attacks. It was a dangerous, high-stakes job, and the men who did it were a special breed. The story of Lucky Strike is a powerful reminder of the incredible deeds performed by ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances. Carl Corman wasn't a superhero. He was a quiet man from Pennsylvania who possessed an extraordinary talent. He and his crew stood their ground against overwhelming odds, and through their skill and bravery, turned the tide of a crucial battle. They were the right men, in the right machine, at the right time. Their legacy, and the legacy of all the tank destroyer crews of World War II, deserves to be remembered. They were the giant slayers, the hunters of the big cats, and their story is a vital chapter in the history of armored warfare. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this story of skill and courage, be sure to hit that like button.